future of the Republican Party. I agree with them. I think that future is now. Please help welcome the next President of the United States, Marco Rubio.
Thank you. I finally get to wear my jacket. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be with you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor, for being here. And thank you, Representative. And thank you to Jack for introducing me all across the state. He's been doing a great job for our campaign from the very early days of it. And thank you for being here. And in the theme of thankfulness and in the week that we're in, as we are about as a nation to celebrate the most American of holidays, obviously the 4th of July is a uniquely American holiday, but so is Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is a uniquely American holiday in which this nation, founded on spiritual principles that our rights come from our Creator of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, our nation stops to give thanks for all of our blessings. Certainly our blessings in our own lives. I've been blessed, everyone in this room has been blessed, and I've certainly been blessed with such a supportive and wonderful family, including a wife that puts up with this and actually has enjoyed it very much to be a part of this, and my 4 children who are healthy and hopefully in school right now. They should be, yeah, they are. And but we've all been blessed. We've been blessed to be citizens and live in the single greatest nation in all of human history. And sometimes it's so easy to say that, right? We just say it as some sort of a talking point. America's the greatest country in the world. I think it's important to stop and understand what we mean when we say that. It's not that other countries don't have good things, because they do. There are other countries with great cultural contributions that they've made to the world. There are great countries we love to visit and certainly have things that are enjoyable. But America isn't great just because we're a rich and powerful nation. Our greatness comes from how unique and exceptional we've been if you compare it to the history of the world. In the whole entire history of the world, almost everyone that ever lived, for example, lived in a society where your future was decided for you. Imagine living in a country where you are told, it doesn't matter how talented you are, it doesn't matter how hard you work, it doesn't matter how good your ideas are, you can only be whatever your parents were. Now, if your parents were wealthy or successful people, that's very good news. But what if they weren't, like most people weren't? I want you to imagine for a moment living in a society that tells you from your earliest days that, listen, don't get your hopes up, don't try to dream big, because people like us can only go so far. Well, that has been the human condition almost everywhere in the world throughout all of history. And that is the thing that makes America exceptional, that it's been so different here. In fact, in this country here, the majority of people live a life better than the ones their parents lived. And their parents lived a life better than their parents did. Because ours is a nation where we have always believed that people have a right to life and liberty and to pursue happiness. That's why we created the free, that's why we implemented the free enterprise system. It's the only economic model in the world where an employee can become an employer. It's the only economic model in the history of the world where so many people could quit their jobs, take their entire life savings, and use it to open a business out of the spare bedroom of their home. And the results are in. It works. It works extremely well. For millions of people, it's led to extraordinary financial wealth. Think about it this way. We are 5% of the world's population, and we have 40% of the world's millionaires. And the vast majority of them, of those millionaires, are people who did not inherit the money. They went out and created it for themselves. Nothing wrong with inheriting it. But it's amazing that we have 40% of the world's millionaires, and most of them are people that went out and created that opportunity. But what really makes us unique is not our rich people, because every country has rich people. You can't find a country on earth that doesn't have rich people. You go to the poorest nation on this planet. The poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere is Haiti. There are rich people in Haiti. What makes us special are the millions and millions and millions of people that aren't rich, but they've achieved success and happiness. My parents were them. My parents came to this country in 1956. They didn't know anyone. They barely spoke English at the time. They had no real education. My father stopped going to school before he even turned 9 because he had to go work. And yet in America, they were able to find jobs that allowed them to own a home in a safe and stable neighborhood. They were able to raise 4 children and give those children the chance at an even better life. And they were able to retire with dignity and security. So we are thankful about how special America is. And I thank God every single day that I had the opportunity to be born in the United States of America. But for the grace of God, my parents could have gone somewhere else or still been stuck on the enslaved island of Cuba. Or I thank God, and I thank God in particular that I get the chance to be a 21st century American. For I believe that we have extraordinary opportunities and challenges and chances before us. That's the good news, and this is what we should be grateful for. but we need to be concerned too. Because what makes us special, these things I just described to you, they're not automatic. They don't happen automatically. These things were the result of decisions and sacrifices that were made by the people who came before us. Your parents, your grandparents, and many of you made the decision that we were going to keep not just America great, but we were going to do whatever it took to make America greater. That has been our story for over 2 centuries, of a nation where each generation said, we will do whatever it takes, not just to protect America, but to expand the American dream. And the result is that each of us inherited from our parents the greatest nation in all of human history. But we need to be concerned because for millions of Americans, that is slipping away. I mean, I don't pay a lot of attention to polls except the ones that say that a majority of Americans believe we're on the wrong track. Except for the ones that say that a majority of Americans believe the American dream is dying. Except for the ones that say a majority of Americans are convinced that their children's lives will not be as good as theirs. I pay attention to those because those polls show us that a growing and majority of Americans believe that what makes us special is slipping away. And so if you want to know what this election is about, it must be about that. Because it's our identity that's at stake. It's why I've often said in this campaign from the first day I announced, this election is not a Republican versus Democrat contest. This election is a generational choice about what kind of country we will be. And the choice before this generation of Americans is very simple and straightforward. Our children will either be the freest and most prosperous Americans that ever lived, or our children will be the first Americans that inherit from their children a diminished country. That's what's at stake in this election. The good news is we can make this nation greater than it's ever been. The bad news is that's not the road we're on right now. It's not. We are on the road to decline. And I want to be frank with you. We are on the road to decline because both parties put us on this road. Now, do I believe the lion's share of blame belongs on the Democratic Party in the last 7 years? Without a doubt. But Republicans contributed to this too. You don't run up a $19 trillion debt without bipartisan cooperation. You don't allow 30 years of unresolved issues to happen without bipartisan cooperation. Both parties have put us on this road, and in particular the Republican Party, made up of leaders who love America and are good people in many respects in the establishment. They're good people and they love America, but they are out of ideas. They've lost a sense of urgency. Many are completely out of touch with reality, what's happening in the world and in your lives. And that's why this election can't just be about promoting the next person in line. This election can't just be about sending the same kind of people, because nothing will change. But the bulk of the blame lies on those who have tried to put this country on a path to more government, more spending, more taxes, more debt, and weakness around the world. And the result is we are on the road to decline. And if we have another 4 years like the last 8 years, that may be the outcome that we can't reverse. The good news is we can fix this. We can turn this country around. But it will take 3 things to do it from our government. The first is we need government policies that allow our economy to be competitive again. This is a very new economy, unlike the old economy. But our policies are stale. Our principles still work. Limited government and free enterprise still works better than it's ever worked. We need to apply those principles to the challenges of a new economy, an economy that's very different than the old economy. It's changing faster than ever. It's driven by innovation. You know this. The businesses that were once the big companies that provided jobs are gone, replaced by a machine, jobs sent overseas, or the jobs just don't pay enough anymore. And yet we have outdated policies. We have a retirement system designed in the 30s, a college system designed in the 50s, anti-poverty programs that don't cure poverty designed in the 60s, energy policies from the 70s, tax policies from the 80s. And yet nothing is like 2005, not to mention 95, 85, 75, or 35. That's how much the world has changed, and our policies need to be modernized. And they also need to take into account that we live in a global economy, which means we now compete with other countries. It wasn't long ago America was one of a few countries in the world you would invest money in. So if your taxes were too high, bad idea, but there were only 2 or 3 other countries you were competing against. Now we're competing against dozens of countries, which is why every day you open up the newspaper to the news that yet another American company has either been bought by a foreign company or bought a foreign company to move their headquarters over there instead of here. We are in a global competition, and our government policies are holding us back because they are outdated and they are uncompetitive. Now, this is what it will take to make us competitive again. Tax reform. Because we have one of the most expensive and burdensome tax codes in the world. We need a tax code that makes America the easiest and the cheapest place in the world to start a business, grow an existing one, and hire people. And I've proposed a comprehensive tax reform that will achieve that. Regulatory reform. Regulations are an impediment to job creation, especially for small and mid-sized businesses. The big businesses don't like regulations, but they can afford to hire armies of people to help deal with these regulations, including law firms, accountants, even lobbyists to create loopholes. The small business cannot, and these regulations are stifling. And that's why for the first time in 35 years in America, we have more businesses dying than starting. Bad trend. That's why we need regulatory reform, and I've proposed a regulatory budget that puts a hard cap on how much regulations can cost our economy. This is why we need to balance our budget. You can't be globally competitive if you have a debt crisis, and we will have a debt crisis. We have a $19 trillion debt that is set to explode in the years to come, and you must deal with it by dealing with what's causing that long-term debt, which is the way Medicare and Social Security are structured for me and for my children. My mother's on Medicare and Social Security. We don't have to change anything for her. I don't support changing anything for her, or people like her, or people that are about to retire. You can't ask a 75-year-old, we've just changed your Medicare, go back to work. You can't do that, and we won't do that. We don't need to do that. But those programs are going to have to be different for me and for my children. In fact, they will be different for me and my children. They either won't exist or they'll work differently. And work differently, it doesn't mean anything draconian. It means instead of retiring at 67, I'll have to retire at 68, which would still make me the youngest senator there. Okay? That's not true, and I won't be there, so don't worry. Almost true. It means that my Medicare benefits could very well be the option of taking my Medicare money and buying a private plan that I like better. We have that now a little bit with Medicare Advantage. My mom uses Medicare Advantage. It means that if I've been financially successful, my Social Security benefits aren't going to grow as fast as they do for someone who didn't make as much money. These are not unreasonable changes. And if we make them now, we can save Social Security and Medicare, balance our budget, and not have to change anything for the people that are on those programs now. The other thing we have to do to be globally competitive is fully utilize our energy resources. And I want us to lead the world in everything, in wind, solar, biofuels, renewables. Let's be the most energy efficient people on the planet. I am for all of that. But I think it is reckless and irresponsible for us to not fully utilize the other energy resources we have. God has blessed this nation with oil, with natural gas, with the ability to develop nuclear energy, even with coal. And we should use all of our energy resources, fully utilize them, in a responsible way, especially natural gas. Natural gas is a game-changing development in America. We have an abundant supply for generations to come. And if you can stabilize the price of energy in America, not only will it lower the cost of living for you, it will give us an advantage in manufacturing. Because the cost of powering a manufacturing plant is one of the biggest overhead costs in manufacturing. And if it is significantly cheaper to power a plant here versus somewhere else, we're going to have a manufacturing renaissance. Imagine being a country that makes things again. That's what we can become if we can fully utilize the natural gas that we have in all of our energy resources. One more thing we have to do to become globally competitive is deal with this healthcare law. It's a disaster. Every week brings more news about what a disaster it is. You're just seeing now that the Obamacare exchanges are on the verge of collapse. The largest insurance company participating in the exchanges, United Healthcare, is talking about getting out. One of the reasons why is because last year I was successful at getting rid of this bailout that they had snuck into Obamacare. There was a bailout fund that was going to use your taxpayer money to bail out insurance companies that lost money on the exchanges. Well, we got rid of the bailout, the companies lost money, they didn't get their bailout, and now they want out. And this is going to continue to happen. We need to repeal Obamacare, and we need to replace it with a system that puts you in charge of your health insurance. What does that mean? That means either a refundable tax credit that you can only spend on health insurance, or the money your employer gives you to buy health insurance, and you will be able to use that money pre-tax. You don't pay taxes on that money. And you will be able to use it to buy any health insurance you want from any company in America across state lines. That will create a competitive insurance marketplace that will lower prices and improve quality, just like it has in auto insurance and in other lines of insurance. If we do these things, the private sector takes care of the rest. You see, be very, very concerned with political leaders that say to you how many millions of jobs they created when they were governor or they were mayor. Unless they grew government by millions of jobs, they didn't create those jobs. The private sector created those jobs. And jobs are created through a very straightforward equation. Someone who has access to money risks that money to start a business or to grow an existing one. And we need to make America the easiest and best place in the world for that to happen. And if we do, the American private sector is going to create millions, not just of new jobs, but better paying jobs. because the jobs of the new economy pay a lot more than the jobs of the old economy. But those new jobs are going to require more skills than jobs have ever required, which is why the second thing we have to do is modernize higher education. We have an outdated model today. To begin with, some of the best jobs of the 21st century require more than high school, but less than 4 years of college. Yet we stop training people to do vocational and career training and career work in America. And so we have a shortage of airplane mechanics. We have a shortage soon of airplane pilots. We have a shortage of car technicians, people that work at the paint and body shop, of welders, pipe fitters, plumbers, in the construction industry. Why did we stop teaching people to do this work? In fact, there was a time when we were telling young Americans, oh, trade school is for the kids that aren't smart enough to go to college. That's a lie. Trade school is for people that want to make $50,000 a year at 18 years of age and up. And we need to be doing more of that. That's why I will be the vocational education president. I will use the bully pulpit of the White House to talk to young Americans about why these are good jobs and why they should think about going into them. But I will also make it easier for them to get these skills. Because today, you can only use federal financial aid to go to school after you graduate high school. I will open it up to 15, 16, 17-year-olds so they can go to high school in the morning and trade school in the afternoon using federal financial aid. Why will I do that? Because when they turn 18 and they graduate, they won't just be getting a high school diploma. They will be getting an industry certification, which means they will be able to go work right away at the paint and body shop, making $45,000 a year as an 18-year-old. Making $50,000 a year as a welder, making $60,000 a year as a long-haul trucker, in the construction trade as an electrician or an air conditioning repair person. My point is these are good paying jobs. We need to do more of it. We need to make higher education easier for non-traditional students, people that have to work full-time and are raising a family but need to go back to school to get a raise but can't because school is too expensive and they don't have the time. Let's have an alternative to higher education through an alternative accrediting model that accredits programs that give you credit for what you've already learned. If you serve 5 years in the military, you get credit for the things you learned while you're in the military. If you've been working for 10 years as a receptionist at a law firm, you get credit for whatever it is you learned during those 10 years. Give people credit for what they already know. Don't make them sit in a classroom and pay for classes on things they've already learned. And then whatever they're missing to complete their degree, allow them to acquire that from a variety of sources, not just from one school, but from a variety of places. Free online coursework, paid online coursework, more work experience, unpaid internships. Allow people to package learning. Why does that matter? Because if you're a 30-year-old single mother raising 2 kids, you can't drop everything to sit in a classroom for 4 years. You have to work full-time and you have to raise those kids. But you're never going to get a raise if you don't go back to school to become a dental hygienist or a paralegal or some other job. We need to make it easier and cheaper and faster for people to be able to do that. We're still going to have 4-year degrees. But we can't allow people to continue to borrow thousands of dollars for a degree that doesn't lead to a job. We have $1 trillion of student loan debt in America. It used to be higher, but I paid off my $100,000 loan 4 years ago. And a lot of it is some of it is people that never graduated, so they have the loan but no degree. Some of it is for people that graduated with a degree, but the degree didn't lead to a job. How do you deal with that? Number one, you provide alternatives to student loans, and I've offered those, like student investment plans, that allow for your education to be paid for by a private investment group that invests in a person the way they invest in a business. If you're financially successful, they make their money back that they invested with a profit. If you're not, they lose their money. But all the risk is on them. It's not a loan sitting on your credit report. It's a risk that they take. And for many promising students, especially graduate students, it will work. Purdue, and Mitch Daniels, the president of Purdue, has already said they will be the first school that participates in this. And I think you will see many more jump on board. And the other is more information. When I'm president, before you take out a student loan, you will be told how much people make when they graduate from your school with the degree that you're seeking. So at least you can make an informed decision about whether you want to borrow $50,000 to major in whatever it is you've chosen. Maybe you don't care how much people make because you're going to graduate school. Maybe you'll change your mind because you intend to go work and you realize there's not a lot of openings for philosophers. There's not a lot of openings for political scientists unless you're going to law school, like I did with my political science degree. My point is, if we can do these two things, if we can make America the most competitive economy in the world, and we can make it faster, cheaper, and easier for our people to acquire the skills they need for the better paying jobs, we're not just going to have an economic recovery, we're going to have an economic renaissance. Because then we'll be able to take advantage of this new economy, which is the most exciting economy in the history of the world. This new economy has created millions of people around the world that can now buy things from us. These were people that were starving 25 years ago. Now they drive cars and fly on airplanes, and they buy consumer products and services, and they travel here as tourists. There are now millions of potential customers for us, millions of potential trade partners. It's easier than ever, because of technology, to open a business. 25 years ago, you wanted to open a business, you needed to find a storefront, you needed an advertising budget. Today, all you need is access to the web in many lines of work. This is an exciting economy, and if we take advantage of it, we're going to have an extraordinary economic recovery. But what's standing in the way is our federal government policies, from leaders who are outdated and from ideas that are, quite frankly, stale or taking us backwards. And if we can do that, we now won't just save the American dream. We're going to expand it to reach more people and change more lives than ever before. But these two things are not the only two things we need to do. Because none of this will matter unless we do the third thing. The third thing is the most important thing the federal government is supposed to do, and that's keep us safe. And today the federal government is failing in that endeavor. You look around the world today at how dangerous it's become. In North Korea, a lunatic possesses dozens of nuclear weapons. The Chinese are undertaking the most rapid military expansion in human history. The Russians are governed by a gangster who is sowing instability in Europe and in the Middle East. Iran is about to receive $150 billion of sanctions relief, thanks to Barack Obama's deal with him and with the Ayatollah. And they're not going to use that money to build schools and bridges and roads. They're going to use that money for what they've always used it for, to sponsor terrorism, to build a long-range missile that can reach the United States, and eventually to buy or build a nuclear weapon. And you add to all of this danger around the world from nation-states the growing threat of radical jihadists. And that's what it is, radical Islamic jihadists. And I know that Hillary Clinton doesn't want to call it that, but you have to call it that. First of all, Muslims themselves call it that. They call it that in Egypt. They call it that in Jordan. They call it that in Iraq. It is radical Islamic jihadists who are trying to conquer the world. You understand, you have to understand your enemy's motivation if you are to defeat them. And their motivation is not simply to control what they have now in Syria and in Iraq. Their motivation is very clear. They don't hide it. They say very clearly what they want. ISIS has made it very clear. They want the entire world, to live under their interpretation of Islam. And so that's why they brutalize Muslims that don't agree with them. They call them heretics. That's why they kill Christians. That's why they kill Jews. That's why they carry out attacks in Paris, France. And that's why they aspire to carry out attacks here in the United States and in Canada. Because they want the entire world to live under their view of Islam. There is no middle ground. These are not people you can negotiate with. Either they win or we win. That is the seriousness of this threat. And the longer we take to wake up to its reality, the harder it's going to be to defeat it and stop it. And in the face of all of these threats I just outlined, what is this president doing? Number one, he's going to leave us with the weakest military in our lifetime. The smallest and oldest Air Force we have had ever. The smallest and oldest Navy since 1914. An Army that's already too small being cut by another 40,000 positions. Intelligence programs that can no longer gather information about these individuals as they move into darknet and encrypted devices. This is a very dangerous world, and we have weakened our capabilities. And the other thing is he's got this confusing foreign policy. Our allies no longer trust us, at least don't trust him. And our adversaries no longer respect us. And the result is a world in chaos. The most important thing the next president of the United States will have to do first and foremost is deal with our national security. You can't grow your economy, and you can't save the American dream if we aren't safe. And increasingly, we are not safe. The threat we face is very real. That's why we need to rebuild our military, so that it is capable of confronting and defeating any potential adversary. In fact, the lesson of history is that weakness invites war. Weakness is the enemy of peace. Weakness invites miscalculation. It is strength that is the friend of peace. For through strength you can deter any potential adversary and prevent war before it even happens. But the other thing we need is a foreign policy of moral clarity. One in which our allies once again trust us and know they can rely on America, and our adversaries know not to test us. And so I would just close by saying that our challenges are real, and we need to be very realistic about the challenges we face. But our opportunities are real too, and we need to be excited about the chance to take advantage of them. And before we start feeling down on ourselves, we should recognize that there's never been a time in our history where we didn't face great challenges. It would be an erroneous reading of our history to argue that America used to have it really good and very easy, and now suddenly we're faced with all these problems. Because that ignores the fact that this nation was founded out of a great challenge. This nation was founded by declaring independence from the most powerful empire in the world. That would ignore the fact that this nation, not long after that, had a civil war that almost ended the young nation and cost the lives of hundreds of thousands of Americans in the process. That would ignore that not long after that civil war, the next generation had to fight in a First World War. The world had never had a world war. It had never seen such carnage. Not long after that First World War ended, this nation had to confront a Great Depression, which was a traumatic moment in the history of this country. Not long after that Great Depression began to end, this nation was confronted with a Second World War, where for a time it looked like Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany were going to win. And as soon as that Second World War ended, this nation was thrust into a long and bitter Cold War. A Cold War that literally threatened the very existence of life on Earth. The 1960s were a hard time. This was a time when the nation was divided generationally over Vietnam and divided regionally over the Civil Rights Movement. This nation has never had it easy. And no generation of Americans got to live free from a challenge. They all face great challenges. Some face challenges even greater than the ones we face now. Ours is the story of a nation that for over 2 centuries, each generation did their part. Each generation of Americans before us confronted their challenges and embraced their opportunities. And because they did, each generation has left the next better off. Now it's our turn. Now the time has come for this generation to do its part, to confront our challenges, solve our problems, and in the process embrace our opportunities. And if we do that, then the greatest era in our history is before us. And we're all called to this task. There is not a person in this room who has not benefited from the American dream. And so we are all called not just to preserve it, but to expand it. I know this deeply. I'm motivated. My sense of urgency is driven as much as anything else by the acknowledgement that America owes me nothing. But I have a debt to America I'll never fully repay. This isn't just the country I was born in. This is the nation that changed the history of my family. As I told you earlier, my parents were born in another country on the island of Cuba. Like most people in the history of the world, they were born into poor families with no connection to power. And they struggled. The reason why they came here in 1956 is because it was the only country in the world that gave people like them a chance. My father had a particular difficult life. When he was 4 days shy of his 9th birthday, his mother died. And so my father had to stop going to school and start working. And he never went back to school, really. And he would work for the next 70 years of his life. When my father was a young boy and later a young man, he had big dreams, because what young people don't have big dreams? His big dreams became impossible, at least for himself. So when my parents came to America, they created a new dream. And their new dream became to make sure that what happened to them never happened to us. Their dream became to give us the chance to do all the things they never could. That became the very purpose of their lives. That's the reason why they worked so hard. In America, my father was a banquet bartender. You may have heard me say this before. And he worked on nights and evenings and holidays, on days he didn't feel like working. He worked behind one of those small portable bars you see at weddings and, I was going to say funerals, but that's only if you're Irish. And, Cubans sometimes. And he stood behind that small portable bar in the back of a room all those years. So one day I would have a chance to be anything I wanted. Even stand in the front of a room like this, running for the highest office in the land. For me, that journey from behind that bar to the life I have today, to the opportunities I've had, for me, that's not just the essence of the American dream. That's what makes this country so special. Because you can't do that almost anywhere else. That's what makes us different. And that's not just my story, that's our story. Because you too are but a generation or two removed from someone who did that for you. You remember what your parents did for you. The fathers that worked 2 jobs, the mothers that gave up on their dreams, the parents who said, we're going to do whatever it takes to make sure that your life is even better than ours. Maybe it was your grandparents that did that for your parents. Or maybe it's you trying to do that for your children now. I make this point because that's what unifies us as a people. And that's what makes America different. And whether or not we remain a special country will largely be determined by whether that is still possible. Can the people who today clean hotel rooms and clean our cars and park our cars at the valet and work on our lawns and sweep away the snow, can those people, through that hard work and sacrifice, not only can they improve their lives, but can they give their children a chance at a better life? The answer to that question will determine what kind of country we are in the 21st century. And I believe that if we do what needs to be done, that American dream won't just survive. It'll be possible for more people than it's ever been before. And then history will say that we weren't just the generation that saved the American dream. We were the generation that expanded it, to reach more people and change more lives than ever before. And because we did what needed to be done, history will say of us that we authored the greatest era in the history of this country, that you and I, in this generation, ushered in a new American century. So I thank you for being here today, and I look forward to talking to you. Thank you very much. Are you the designated microphone man? With the flag. So that's hard. So you'll need to get his attention, not mine, and then I'll answer your questions. Thank you again for being here. Question?
Mr. Marco Rubio.
I've never had a town hall where it takes more than 5 seconds for a question. Yes, sir.
Could you elaborate on your position on the RFS and future of renewable fuels?
Well, as I've said before, a couple points I would make. The first is, I don't want to see our tax code favor any industry over another. So one of the things that I've done, and I know that's not what the RFS exactly does, but one of the things I've argued in my tax plan is to allow every business in America to immediately expense whatever they invest in their business. So whether you're in renewables or whether you make sweaters, every dollar under my tax plan, every dollar you put into your business, you will be able to immediately and fully deduct from your tax liability in that given year. That's a huge development, because most businesses today, unless you have a tax loophole, you can only deduct your expenses on a depreciation schedule. And for most small businesses, that's almost impossible to do. You may not even be around. As far as RFS is concerned, as I've said before, I would not have supported it had I been in the Senate at the time. I wasn't, but it's passed now. And that means that people have gone out and made investments based on it. People have started businesses, people have made investments, people have created jobs. I don't believe it's fair to go in and say we're going to yank it away from you in the middle of the program. It is set to expire in 2022, and my hope is that by then the industry will not just be treated fairly in the tax code in comparison to every other industry in the energy sector, but that it will be self-sustaining and no longer require a portfolio. But I'm not in favor of renewing it after that, but I don't believe that we should yank it away in the middle of the program, because people have already invested money in it. They've already put money towards it based on this government policy, and it would be unfair to just yank it away from them from one day to the next.
I like what you said. You have a big job when you go to Washington. You have a lot of opposition. How are you going to break through the establishment and accomplish what you said?
Well, that's a good point. The first thing we need to do is, the establishment basically means, when people say the establishment, and I know it well because they've opposed me every time I run for office. When I ran for the U.S. Senate, the entire leadership of the United States Senate was against me. They supported my opponent, who was at the time the Republican governor of Florida. He since then has switched parties twice, and I warned them about that. And I took them on and we won. And then now when I decided to run for president, they all came out and said, why? First of all, why? It's not your turn. You got to wait in line. There are other people that have been around longer, and I don't know I didn't know there was a line. And I don't know what we're waiting for. We need to have a sense of urgency. The second point I would make is I think it's time for our party to have a new set of people in play. One of the fundamental arguments I'm making is I'm not against the people that have served our country for a long time. Thank you for that. But we need new people. The time has come to turn the page and allow new people, especially people that understand what life is like today. Because I can tell you, the longer you're there, the more out of touch you become. I don't care how long you work at it. Now look, Chuck Grassley, an incredible senator, right? But what makes him incredible is he goes to every county every year. He's out there trying to stay in touch with everybody's lives. He's a rarity. It's not that they're bad people. It's just this system was not designed for people to be there for 35, 45, 50 years. And in the vast majority of cases, you're going to have people that become out of touch, not because they're bad, it's just what happens through the years of the process. The other thing that happens is like a rock in a river. When the rock is thrown in the river, it's jagged and ready to go. But over the years, as that water runs over it, it becomes smoothed out. That's what the political process does over time. It takes away your sense of urgency. You start falling in love with the process and the institution, as opposed to, Harry Reid's been attacking me lately because he claims that I said I hate the Senate. I never said I hated the Senate. What I said is, I'm frustrated at my time in the Senate because nothing happens. We don't do anything. We have a debt that keeps growing. They don't do anything about it. 90% of the votes are show votes, or symbolic to make a political point. But he wasn't offended by that. He was offended that I said something bad about the Senate as an institution. This is what happens when you're there for too long. You fall in love with the institution as opposed to what you're there to do. It's why I've always been a supporter of term limits. And I think we do need term limits in this country at the federal level, and I hope we can amend our Constitution to require it. But the broader point I would make is we need to allow new people to come in. We need to allow new people with fresh ideas, with a sense of eagerness and urgency to come into our party. This is as much about changing the Republican Party as it is changing Washington. We need a Republican Party that has a sense of urgency and vibrancy, that's in touch with what's happening in people's lives. And look, are we willing to compromise on ideas? In the Republic, you have to. I won't compromise on our principles. And I do think there are ideas that if we can put the politics outside of it, we can work together on. My higher education ideas are bipartisan. I don't know why national security would ever be a partisan issue. And then there are issues we're going to have elections over, like the size and scope of government. For example, I don't think we need Common Core. I don't even think we need a Department of Education. I don't know why the federal government's involved in K through 12 education. We're probably going to have an election over that, and we're probably going to have a fight over that. For the Democrats, no matter what problem you ask me about today, they've got some tax increase that's going to pay for it. For everything. We're going to have elections over that because they have a very different view of government than I do. So I will always look for opportunities to work together on things. But I also believe that our positions, the things we stand for as a movement, as the limited government free enterprise conservatives, is a majority position in America. I want our economy to be the most competitive in the world. I want our people to have the most skills in the world, and I want our military to be the most powerful in the world. I don't have a poll, but I promise you that is a 70 or 80% issue in this country. We need to do a better job of explaining to people who we are and what we stand for. And if we do, we can help new people get into the system and hopefully change it. But the biggest thing I'm going to bring is that sense of urgency. The presidency is unlike any other political office because it allows you to immediately speak directly to the American people. The last time we had someone that effectively did that was Ronald Reagan. When Reagan needed to do something, he would go straight to the American people and say, here's the problem, here are our choices, here's the direction that I've chosen for our country, and here's why. I need you to pick up the phone and pressure your members of Congress to support me in this. We need a president that does that again. Not a president like the one we have now, who has spent the better part of a week traveling the world attacking Republicans, as opposed to focusing on how to attack and defeat ISIS. It'll be a very different presidency from my very first day there.
What's the first thing you would do to defeat ISIS?
Well, there are a number of things we need to do. There's not one thing that defeats ISIS. First, let's understand what ISIS is. ISIS was once Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They were Al-Qaeda. Al-Baghdadi and others believe Al-Qaeda was not radical enough. They didn't believe Al-Qaeda was radical enough. So they created an independent group called ISIS. It wasn't called that at the time. They were basically Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They were defeated and driven out of Iraq by Sunnis themselves. And so they went into Syria and scattered to the four winds. And then the people of Syria, primarily the Sunnis, rose up and said, we want to get rid of Assad. Because Assad is an Alawi, which is a minority within a minority, and he was brutal to the Sunnis. The majority of the people that rose up against Assad were not radical terrorists. They were Syrians. And some of them were Christians, but a lot of them were Sunni Arabs who just were tired of being oppressed. ISIS took advantage of that and said, we're Sunnis too, and we have more weapons, and we have more fighters than the other Sunnis that are fighting. Join us instead. And that's what they did, and they grew to this very powerful group. They are a radical Sunni group. The majority of Muslims in the world are Sunni. They are a radical sect of Sunniism, to the point where they consider other Sunnis heretics. They are the only ones that are right. So you have to defeat them. The way to defeat them is for Sunnis themselves to reject them ideologically and defeat them militarily. So I'll work backwards. The way ISIS is defeated is for a Sunni Arab army to confront and defeat them on the ground and take back Sunni villages. You cannot take back a Sunni village with Shia fighters. Number one, those Shia fighters are under the control of Iran. And number two, what those Shia fighters have been doing when they took over Sunni villages, after they defeat ISIS, they brutalize the Sunnis that are there. It's one of the reasons why Iraq fell apart. The second, you can't take over Sunni villages with Kurds, because while Kurds are Sunnis, they're not Arab. And so as a result, they create this conflict in the region. And so those villages and those cities have to be retaken by Sunni Arab fighters. You need a combined Sunni force. made up primarily of Sunnis from Iraq and Syria, but also army regulars from Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. That is how you defeat them with that ground force, and the bulk of it has to be Sunni fighters, primarily Arab. But that won't happen without us. We will have to embed alongside them some American special operators fighters. Why? Because those special operators can carry out high-profile attacks on leadership nodes. I believe we should be carrying out attacks against Sunni leadership nodes, videotaping the whole thing, and putting it up on YouTube so the world can see that these people are not invincible. I want the world to see how these ISIS leaders cry like babies when they're captured. I want the world to see how these Sunni leaders, these ISIS leaders, once captured, begin to sing like canaries if they survive. I want the world to see that they're not invincible, and I want these young fighters around the world that are thinking of joining ISIS because they're unstoppable to have second thoughts about it once they see how easily humiliated they are by American power. The bulk of the ground force need to be Sunni Arabs, but we do need special operators to carry out those attacks. Also to coordinate on the ground the logistics. Because while these Sunni fighters may be brave, they're not skilled military tacticians. They will need our support in conducting and tactically laying out these things. The other thing they need from us is increased airstrikes. And I mean real airstrikes that go after their oil facilities and their tankers and their leadership nodes. But you need special operators to call in those strikes. For them to truly be precise, you need people that are forward deployed, that can put eyes on the target and call them in and call in the coordinates and carry out these attacks. They need intelligence and logistical support from us, because it is our intelligence that can tell them where ISIS is and where ISIS is going. We have the intelligence and surveillance capabilities. The Sunni fighters do not. And last but not least, it requires American leadership. Only America can put that coalition together. Only America can use its leverage on Saudi Arabia, on Egypt, on Jordan, and others to say, we need to put together this coalition. And the bulk of it needs to be you guys. And let me tell you why it won't be a hard argument. Because Egypt knows that ISIS is coming after them. Why? Because they're already in the Sinai, and they're already trying to conduct attacks inside of Egypt. Saudi Arabia knows that ISIS considers the royal family heretics. They're going after Saudi Arabia. The king of Jordan knows they're going after him. He knows this for a fact. They are growing. They're in Afghanistan. ISIS is now on the ground in Afghanistan recruiting Taliban fighters away from the Taliban, saying to them, why are you members of the Taliban? They don't win anymore. We win. Join us. So this is a growing threat, and it will require American leadership to put together a coalition. And how can our NATO allies help? By embedding special operators of their own on the ground, by participating in the airstrikes and the logistical support and the funding for this program. We can work with France and other countries that are interested in being a part of this coalition. But the bulk of the ground force must be Arab Sunnis, or this war won't be won. Because as soon as you defeat ISIS, a new group will take their place. A new group of radical Sunnis will take their place. So it'll take a while. This is complicated. It's not the flip of a switch. And I don't want to get deep into the weeds with you on this, but let me just say one more thing. Once you embed Americans on the ground, the Shia militias will attack the Americans. Because they want to defeat ISIS, but they also want to defeat us. So it's going to be complicated. But what choice do we have? These guys are not going to turn into stockbrokers or open up a chain of car washes. They're radical killers. And either they win or we win. And the longer we take to do what I just outlined, the harder it's going to be. In just a year and a half, they're no longer in Syria and in Iraq. They're in Libya now. If you're a foreign fighter, and I know none of you are, but if you were a foreign fighter and you decided you wanted to join ISIS, you know where they're going to tell you to go? To Libya. That's where they have their travel office. That's where they input you. That's where they train you. Why? Because they're not fighting against anyone in Libya. They have a prime operating space. That's what they're trying to create in Afghanistan now, too. So this is a complicated issue, but we have to do it. This president's not doing any of that. It's all symbolic. It's all the least amount possible. And I don't get it, other than the fact that he doesn't want to embroil us in another conflict. Well, guess what? We're embroiled in another conflict, whether he wants it or not. And either they win or we win. I know what outcome I want.
So there are two key ingredients to growing an economy: entrepreneurship and education. In your speech, you talked about lessening small business regulation.
All business regulation, but yes, small
correct,
business.
and changing the stigma on vocational jobs. As president, how do you plan on lessening the barriers to entry for startups and small business?
Well, first of all, the barriers to entry to startups are multifaceted. One is access to capital. The small banks that might have lent you money in the past don't do it anymore because Dodd-Frank has really hurt small and regional banking. If you have this idea, forget about a startup in the tech field that everybody thinks about. I know someone who's been working at a dry cleaning shop for 25 years, basically runs the place. has a really good relationship with his boss, and has finally said to him, you know, over the years I've saved a little bit of money. I would like to open my own dry cleaning shop. And I'll open it far from here so I'm not competing directly against you. Guy said, that's great. Go do it. Well, it takes money to open a shop. You got to buy the equipment. You got to do all this stuff together. He needs a loan. He can't find any bank that will loan him the money. Citibank's not going to loan you the money to do that. Wells Fargo's not going to loan you the money. These are big banks. Citibank in particular is involved in global transactions. They have a small business division, but by and large, the bulk of their work is the big stuff. Who would lend you that money 10 or 15 years ago? The local bank. The local bank that specializes in local development. Why can't they lend you that money anymore? Because the federal regulators say that's a bad loan. How are you going to lend money to this guy? He's never been in business before. He has no cash flow report. That's what these local banks used to do. But now they can't because Dodd-Frank and the regulators are basically saying to them, we're going to make you hold all this money in your accounts, or we're going to make it almost impossible for you to lend it to anyone, at least the business model that you're involved in. And then the compliance costs. You have these regulators showing up in your office every month, going over every loan you make, every decision you make, and you've got to hire people to deal with them. So you're now spending more and more money dealing with these regulators. And so Dodd-Frank has killed small, regional, and community banking, a huge impediment to entrepreneurship. The other is, depending on what industry you're in, regulations. And let me tell you something we don't say enough. Regulations are a tool that are often used by big businesses to ensure that a small business can't start up. They know that if you create a mountain of regulations, we, the big business, can deal with it. We don't like it, but I can hire 100 lawyers to deal with you. But the small competitor can't do that. So maybe these regulations aren't so bad. They're keeping a competitor out of my space. That's a barrier to entry. So that's why the regulatory budget is so critical and so important. That's why repealing Dodd-Frank is so critical and so important. And the third is the tax code. Most small startup businesses, in fact, 90% of businesses in America are organized as pass-through companies. If you're a business owner, you know exactly what that means. It means you're an S corporation or a limited partnership. You pay your business taxes on your personal rate. Well, your personal rate could be as high as 39.5%, depending on how much money your business made that year. The big corporations are paying at 35, but between the loopholes some of them have found, some are paying 0. I've argued we should have a flat business tax code for every business, no matter how you're organized. No business should be paying more than 25% of their business income in federal taxes. Everyone. That puts everyone on an equal playing field. That puts the big business with 100,000 employees on the same level as the small business with 10 in terms of the tax code. And the other thing is we allow you to immediately expense what you invest. Again, a huge advantage for a big business because they've been able to create loopholes in the tax code because of the lobbying force they have. So they're allowed to immediately expense certain things because they've created these loopholes in the tax code. You can't. You're a small business and you start up a dry cleaning shop and you invest $10,000 in the equipment. You have to write off the cost of that investment over a number of years on a schedule. I say, under my tax plan, you write it off right away. In that first year, you take full and immediate expensing of every penny you invest in your business. Another huge advantage for the startup company that's trying to start. These are real impediments to upward mobility, and it is why you have more businesses dying than starting right now in America. We must reverse that trend if we want to remain a special economy. Yes, sir. Good morning.
You talked about your energy policy earlier. Could you expand a little bit about how you want to utilize clean and renewable energy and get away from some of the reliance on the Middle East?
Yeah, well, I mean, best way to, first of all, our reliance on the Middle East is largely built on our inability to fully utilize the resources the Middle East produces. So, for example, oil, we're not allowed to conduct oil exports today. America is not allowed to export oil. And as a result, places us at a competitive global disadvantage. We also need to utilize our advantages that we have, which is we have a reliable and steady supply of natural gas that many of our competitors do not have. As far as the other things that you've talked about, I think the American innovators are already moving us in that direction. I think energy efficiency technologies are a great thing that the market continues to work on. Cars today are more energy efficient than they were 10 years ago through innovation and will continue to become more efficient. The development of alternative fuel sources as part of our overall portfolio of energy resources are also developing, and technologies making them more and more cost effective. For example, these battery-operated cars. Again, the development of that battery is taking a long time, but it's innovation that's going to solve that problem, not a government mandate. So my view of it is that we need to make America a place where all innovation can succeed, but especially in the energy sector. And you do that by some of the things we just outlined today. And I believe the American innovator is going to allow us not just to generate new sources of power, but also to become more efficient in our use of resources. But I don't think that that should come at the expense of established sources of energy as well. And I think you can do all of it. One of the things we never talk about is nuclear energy anymore. Nuclear energy is being used now for a long time. We can do it safely and reliably in America. It is the cleanest of all the generating powers that we have existing, and it has become nearly impossible to build one in the United States because of permitting and the cost involved in the process of setting one up. So I think we need to have the most diverse possible portfolio of energy resources. You don't want to be overly dependent on one resource versus another, because if something happens in the global market on that one resource, you're immediately impacted. I think we need to have the most diverse portfolio possible, and a lot of that's going to be driven through innovation. And it already is being driven through innovation. And we'll make it easier through the changes in the tax code and the regulatory code that I've outlined today. We have time for one more?
Senator, one more.
I like everything you've been saying. I'm curious about your stance on the border and what you would do to help secure that.
Well, first we have to define what the border is. And first of all, let us thank you all for your service. We thank you so much for keeping us safe. You know, there's trends going on in this country, and one of the things that's happened lately is this sort of negative talk about law enforcement. But even the people that are negatively talking about them, I always remind them, hey, if you get in trouble, your first call is going to be to 911, and one of those guys or gals are the ones that are going to show up. And they're willing to stand between you and some violent lunatic criminal who's coming to hurt you. They're willing to die so you don't have to. And so we are really grateful to our men and women who serve in law enforcement, and we thank you for what you do for us. We have to define the border. The border is not just a physical border with Mexico. It most certainly is that. But the border is broader than that. Here's a statistic I always outline, because if you ignore it, you're ignoring the problem. Over 40% of the people in this country illegally entered legally. What does that mean? They got a 90-day visa, and they stayed. And we don't know, because we basically are a country that checks you in but never checks you out. So we know that you came in because your visa was swiped at the entry point. We have no idea if you ever left or not. So that's 40 to 45% of our problem. In Florida, it's over 70% of our problem. We also have to understand what's the magnet that's driving most people here, and that's employment. So when the economy's doing well and jobs are being created, you see migration goes up. When jobs and the economy takes a dip, you see migration go down. In fact, the Pew study last week found that for the first time in, I think, 25 years, people from Mexico, there were more people going back than coming in from Mexico. There are still people crossing the border from Guatemala, Honduras, apparently Syria on Friday, all over the world. But from Mexico, you have more people going back than coming in. And if that's a combination of less jobs here in the trades that they work in, like construction, and a growing middle-class economy in Mexico in certain parts of the country. But we have to understand the job magnet. So how do you secure the border? You do three things. Number one is physical security. People don't cross every part of the southern border. There are parts of the southern border you don't cross. Why? Because they're dangerous mountain terrains, far from an interstate highway. If you even make that journey, all you wind up is in more desert after more desert. So there are corridors on the southern border, and we know where they are. And those are the places we need to focus. Not just more walls, but more personnel, and more sensors, and more cameras, the ability to apprehend people who are trying to cross those sectors. That should be our priority. The second thing we have to do is have a mandatory E-Verify system that's cost-effective, that basically requires employers to electronically verify the person they're hiring is legally in the country. And the third thing you need is an entry-exit tracking system, where we track people on temporary visas when they come in and they go out, and that is immediately fed into E-Verify. So E-Verify, if Marco Rubio comes in and my visa expires, on day 91, my name pops up in the E-Verify system. And if I try to go get a job, my name shows up, and they know they can't hire me. Today, if you're an employer, you know that all you need to do is sign this paper. All they have to do is produce a social security card, but that might be them. And so an entry-exit tracking system, an E-Verify system that shuts off the job magnet, and more security on the southern border, and you will see a reduction in illegal immigration. You would see a significant reduction in illegal immigration. We know what it takes to do it. Some of these things have been required in the past, and then Congress ignored it. For example, there was a requirement in the law a few years ago that required double fencing on the border. That was a law, and it was passed, and it required the building of that fence. And about 5 years later, Congress came in and took the money out of it and used it for something else. So this needs to happen. And if we do it, you will see the results. It will work. And now's the perfect time to do it. with all this attention being paid to some of the issues going on around the world, and now that the migratory process from Mexico has slowed, now is the perfect time to truly focus on this so that the next time we have a big wave of migration, we're prepared to handle it. The administration will tell you the border's already secure. It's more secure than it's ever been. But the truth is, in 2014, we found out how untrue that is. In 2014, you had families in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador so desperate that they sent their children to the United States by themselves, and they made it across the border. That was proof that this country has not been able to secure its southern border, the fact that people were able to cross in those vast numbers. So it isn't that complicated. It just takes the willingness and the urgency to do it. And we have to make that our first priority. And until we do that, you're not going to be able to do anything else on immigration. It's not enough to pass a law that says you're going to do these things. People actually want to see that it's working. If you pass a law, you put it into place, and people see the results, okay, it's working. Illegal immigration is substantially down and under control, then I think people are going to be reasonable about everything else. But until that happens, you're not going to be able to move forward on anything on immigration. And that's why I think that this should be our top priority when it comes to immigration. It should be the first step, and it's the key that unlocks everything else. Well, I'm grateful that you would come this morning. I thank you very much. I know how hard it is to drive. Well, it's not too bad this morning. When it snows in Miami, I know I always hate driving. So, but look, I'm really grateful. I thank you. I'm thankful that you would come here today to listen to me. I know this is an important decision. It's a role that Iowa plays every 4 years. And I hope that I can earn your support on February 1st. I'm asking for your support. We'll be back, and you'll continue to hear from us. And if you haven't been convinced yet, we're going to keep working on you. We're nothing if not persistent. But we hope that we can convince you that we're the right choice for our party and for our country, so that together we can usher in a new American century. So have a great Thanksgiving. God bless you.
Jack, did you have a bag exchange you guys trying to get done? That car's going to Council Bluffs, so we just meet him there. What do you think?
Thanks for minding us up. How you doing? Good. Everything's fine? Real good.
Why am I on here?
Yeah, get something going.
She could be like, it's weird. They left too much.
Hey, Craig. Well, Kevin, should we roll? Very smooth. Remember to catch your hook. Yeah. Already done, right? A fun call.
Are we in charge of taking these chairs back? Okay. So you want me to take? You want me to take these?
I mean, I know they're going to try to kill it. We had them pretty much.
Ryan gets right to get a picture of You didn't know that's where you're here. Carry all the chairs up. We make you sit up front, and we make you carry chairs. You guys nothing on the phone? Not such a good.
Hey, pick me up. Well, I've got several
Oh, we're gonna stay and shake hands for I'm gonna do a couple back first.
Hey, hi, how are you? Watch yourself. Yeah.
nice turnout for Monday morning.
You a lawman, Mr. Swede? Because I don't see no badge.
No, there's no official law out here yet.
Then what authority you got to be interrogating me?
Mr. Durant has appointed me to bring some order to the chaos out here.
When's the last time you took a look outside, Mr. Swede? Looks to me like chaos is winning.
Well, when harlots and dipsomaniacs are killed, I lose not a minute's sleep. But Daniel Johnson was a valuable asset to Mr. Durant.
Daniel Johnson was hated by just about every man who worked for him.
Any with a reason to kill him? Perhaps one of the Negroes. I heard he had some trouble with them.
I don't know nothing about that.
Well, that leaves only you then.
You know what? I'm done here. This ain't no court.
This here's Beauty. She's an old piece, but she still shoots true. We're gonna give you a chance to confess to this crime. I